Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing the 14th episode of the final season of Happy Days. The Spirit is Willing.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happened in The Spirit is Willing.
Fonzie has dragged Chachi and Tommy away from the movie theater and their dates to the garage to show them an old worn-down car. It's a 1955 Chevy, the greatest car made in the greatest year in history. Chachi and Tommy are both confused as to why 1955 was so great.
Come on, Josh, 1955. That was the year that, that's the year,
Fonzie asserts that it's because that was the year Bill Haley did Rock Around the Clock, the year that cruising became a part of life, the year that James Dean did Rebel Without a Cause. If it were up to Fonzie, it would be 1955 forever. The present is too fraught with decisions. Is he going to stay single, get married, be a mechanic, be a teacher?
In 1955, you know what my biggest problem was?
What?
Can I get another day out of my t-shirt?
Chachi still makes fun of him for buying the old car, and Fonzie threatens him with physical violence. The boys return to their movie. Later that night, Fonzie gets the car radio working just in time to hear the 5 Satins recording of In the Still of the Night. He's interrupted by a woman who says she just missed her bus and has to call a cab. He directs her to the phone, only for her to be distracted by the radio.
Oh, I love that song.
She asks if he's listening to the Big Bob Little show, but Fonzie says Big Bob Little quit 8 years ago to run for Congress. She also identifies the car as a 55 Chevy Bel Air. She used to own a car like that. She'd love to take a ride once he finishes fixing it. He offers to give her a ride home on his motorcycle, and after being assured it's no bother, she accepts and tells him her name is Nancy Haley. They don't get to her house until 4 a.m.
It's 4 a.m.
4 a.m. Good thing it's not a school night.
Not that either of them are all that bothered. Fonzie says he'd like to see her again, and Nancy says they already have a date for when Fonzie finishes that car. The next night at the Cunningham house, Howard has a surprise for Marion. They're going on that trip to Sweden.
I found out you can save a fortune by staying off the beaten path.
Well, Howard, just how far off the beaten path?
Yeah, well,
He has it all figured out. They'll drive to Newfoundland, then hike up the coast to catch a Norwegian herring boat, then it's just a mail plane ride to Oslo, a bike ride to Stockholm, and then they get 2 days in Sweden. Marion says it'll still be better than their trip to Yosemite. Howard asks Joni if they still have Richie's bike, but Joni reminds him they left it in Yosemite. Fonzie comes in to tell Marion about his date, including the fact that she left her purse in the garage, which means she wants Fonzie to return it. Marion mentions she did that to Howard once. She got it back with $8 missing.
I paid you back, Marion.
When Fonzie gives it back, he wants to put a gift in there, and Marion says it would be sweet. Fonzie arrives at Nancy's house. An older woman answers the door, and Fonzie says he took out her daughter last night.
I don't know who you were out with last night, but it wasn't my daughter.
She has no daughter. When Fonzie asks about Nancy Haley, she mentions there was a Haley family here, with a daughter, but they moved out about 10 years ago, when that daughter died in a car accident. Fonzie returns to the Cunningham house to tell the whole story to Marion, Howard, Joni, and Chachi, and be reassured that he's not crazy, even if he says he went out with a girl who's dead. Chachi suggests it was the wrong house, but Fonzie has proof it was the same house. Howard suggests there are 2 Nancy Haleys, but that makes no sense then that she would take him to that house.
One is dead for 10 years, and the other takes me to a house that neither of them lived in.
Chachi suggests it was a girl who doesn't want to go out with him again. But naturally, Fonzie doesn't believe it. Fonzie concludes he's just crazy. After he leaves, Marion admits she always thought he was a bit strange.
2 weeks later.
Fonzie has once again dragged Chachi and Tommy out of the movies to show them the completely renovated 55 Chevy.
You did all this in just 2 weeks? Come on, Fonz, where's the other car?
They go back to the theater, and Fonzie shines the windshield, only for Nancy to appear in the car. She says she had to go out of town, and Fonzie says the woman at her house said she was dead.
Do I look like I'm dead?
She changes the subject. Does he want to beat that wild and carefree guy from 1955 again? They go for a ride, and it begins to rain. The car suddenly stops working on a railroad track. Fonzie wants to get out and fix whatever's wrong, but as the sound of the oncoming train gets louder, the car doors lock on their own. Nancy reminds him of when he said it should be 1955 forever, and offers him a way to make that happen. He realizes she wasn't there when he said that, but he's wrong. Nancy came with the car. As Fonzie struggles to get out, the train gets closer and closer.
Get away from me, I want to live!
And then Fonzie wakes up in the still unfixed 55 Chevy in the garage, being woken up by Tommy, who's there for work. Fonzie, overjoyed that it was all just a dream and Marion doesn't think he's strange, offers to buy Tommy breakfast. Then the car is going to the junkyard. 1955 was his favorite year, but as we learned from history, people who live in the past are mostly dead. But still inside the car is Nancy's purse.
Thank you, Peter. That was The Spirit is Willing. It first aired back on April 24th, 1984. Happy Days had been off the air for months at this point. The show went on hiatus in February 1984 to make room for ABC's coverage of the Winter Olympics in Sarajevo.
Tonight, ABC's exclusive coverage of the Winter Olympic Games begins.
After that, ABC tested various shows in the 8:30 Tuesday time slot, including Ripley's Believe It or Not with Jack Palance and the new sitcom AKA Pablo with comedian Paul Rodriguez.
Tuesday, B. Arthur becomes Pablo's press agent.
Mission Impossible.
AKA Pablo.
The Happy Days episodes that would have aired during the hiatus were finally shown in the summer of 1984.
The battle that would have been is now a sad display.
When Happy Days finally returned on April 24th, it followed a rerun of Foul-Ups, Bleeps, and Blunders. This was the episode with a guest appearance by Tom Bosley. It also included some bloopers by Steve Martin. Happy Days managed to get slightly higher ratings than its lead-in, and together they came in second place for the hour. CBS had a new episode of a news magazine series called The American Parade, hosted by Charles Kuralt.
I'm Charles Kuralt. Join us for The American Parade Tuesday.
This episode featured a profile of Lucille Ball, a report on home care, and a discussion with war correspondents describing their experiences in El Salvador. By the way, the Mississippi was canceled in March 1984. Aww. And NBC still managed to win the hour with a rerun of The A-Team, which got higher ratings than any other primetime show that night. The episode in question was Water, Water Everywhere, in which a greedy land developer tries to force some Vietnam veterans to give up their property. So, Peter, of those choices, what are you watching?
Well, as much as I love Steve Martin and Tom Bosley, I am going to have to go with The A-Team again. That sounds amazing.
I will assume that by that point, I'd already seen Water, Water Everywhere. So I'm going to give The American Parade with Charles Kuralt a chance. No one remembers this show. It's barely recorded anywhere. Maybe watching it on April 24th, 1984 would be your only chance to see it.
Oh, that is a very good point, yeah.
The Spirit is Willing was directed by Jerry Paris and was written by Larry Strother. This is Larry's last script credit on the show, but he'll be on the writing staff until the very end of the run. He went on to work on such shows as Night Court, Malcolm in the Middle, Whoops, and My Sister Sam. In more recent years, Larry's been writing nonfiction historical books and managing a community TV station in Los Angeles. As for guest stars this week, the main one is Alexa Hamilton as Nancy Haley.
I'll show you the quickest way to my house.
And I'll make sure I don't take it.
Alexa is a British-American actress with plenty of TV and film credits from the early 80s to today. Before Happy Days, she'd already been on Chips, The Greatest American Hero, Bosom Buddies, Voyagers, Trapper John M.D., Knight Rider, and more. After this episode, she appeared on First and 10, Matlock, Santa Barbara, and NCIS. Her movies include Atlas Shrugged 2, The Strike, 3 for the Road, and the TV remake of The Poseidon Adventure. She was also romantically involved with David Soul of Starsky and Hutch fame. Peter, what did you think of Alexa Hamilton as Nancy Haley?
I liked her performance a lot. Basically, she has to start out as completely normal and make the leap into being slightly terrifying by the end, and I think she handles that very well. She's just a charming, perky young woman who likes 1955 as much as Fonzie does. So there's absolutely nothing weird about the fact that she just sort of disappears and then reappears because she had to go out of town. And also, she's definitely not dead. Why would you think that, Fonzie? Actually, she is dead, and she wants you to be dead too. Being dead is fun.
This is a fascinating character because she has to be seductive and flirtatious, but also sinister and ultimately like a siren who's dragging Fonzie down. I think Alexa Hamilton does a great job with this character, making her both appealing and terrifying.
Do you remember when you said if you had it your way, it would be 1955 forever?
We also have Patty Carr as the woman who lives in Nancy's old house.
Wait a minute. There were some Haleys who lived here, and they had a daughter. I don't remember her name.
Patty was an actress from St. Paul, Minnesota, with lots of TV and film credits from the 1980s to the 2000s. You could have seen her on The Sopranos, Sex and the City, Law and Order, Murder, She Wrote, Mad About You, and much more. Her movies include Mighty Aphrodite and A Stranger is Watching. Patty died at the age of 88 in 2020. Peter, any thoughts on Patty Carr as the lady in Nancy's old house?
The role of the person who gets to say, you can't have gone out with her, she died 10 years ago, is always really fun because there are so many different ways you can take it. You can go big and sinister and spooky with it, or you can just be normal about it, which is arguably the scarier route to take. And she goes with the latter. I think it's a good choice because she might just think that Fonzie's just some guy playing a dumb prank. It is nice that she provides enough information that he is able to put the pieces together.
I think the tone of this episode is influenced a bit by The Twilight Zone. And on The Twilight Zone, there are frequently stories where people think they're losing their mind because their version of reality is different from everybody else's version of reality. What really helps sell it is if people are realistic and play it sort of deadpan.
You know, this is like that Twilight Zone where the guy wakes up and he's the same and everybody else is different.
Which one?
They were all like that.
As for songs this week, the song of the episode is In the Still of the Night by the Five Satins. This is a classic doo-wop hit from 1956. It was only a modest success back then, but has since become one of the best remembered oldies from the 1950s, partially thanks to its use in movies and TV shows. My favorite use of that song is in the movie Dead Ringers, starring Jeremy Irons.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Henry Winkler sings In the Still of the Night at least twice in this episode.
That's great.
First of all, Peter, what did you think of Henry singing this song?
It's a nice little performance, and it doesn't ask him to overtax his vocal range.
Let's move on to cultural and historical references. The title of this episode is a biblical reference.
This time, it's biblical.
In the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 26, verse 41, Jesus says to his disciples, "Watch and pray that you do not enter into temptation, for the spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." The plot of this episode is heavily influenced by a couple of songs from the so-called teenage tragedy era of pop music. First, there's Lori, Strange Things Happen by Dickie Lee from 1965. In that song, a young man arrives at a girl's house to pick her up for a date, only to learn that she died a year earlier. He then finds his sweater on the girl's grave.
And then I looked and saw my sweater lying there upon her grave.
There's also Teen Angel by Mark Dinning from 1960. In that song, a girl is hit by a train while trying to retrieve her boyfriend's class ring from his stalled car. Peter, I think we've talked about the teenage tragedy records before, haven't we?
They were such a big part of popular music in the late 50s, early 60s. It really makes you wonder what was going through people's heads at the time. Most of these songs were made by adults and not actual teenagers. So they were kind of selling this vision of adolescence to adolescents that was centered around the idea that dying young is big and epic and romantic. And they definitely didn't invent that. Romeo and Juliet, that's an example of that. So it's just interesting is all.
Chachi says that men are at their sexual prime between the ages of 18 and 20.
Men are at their sexual prime between the ages of 18 and 20. I've only got 3 weeks left.
This is not accurate. Male sexual desire peaks in the 20s and declines in the 30s as testosterone levels decrease.
It's very good that you said that, because when I heard it in this episode, I thought, well, I'm 26. I guess I'm past my sexual prime.
Fonzie buys and restores a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air. He calls it the greatest car made in the greatest year in history. In fact, 1955 was a landmark year for the Chevrolet or Chevy division of General Motors. That year, Chevrolet drastically changed its body design and added an optional V8 engine to its cars. The 1955 Chevys were extremely successful, and the cars from that year are still highly prized by collectors today. Peter, do you still have any affection for those 1955 Chevys?
I do, kind of. A lot of 50s cars are very aggressively rectangle shaped. I like that it manages to make that look good.
Fonzie says that 1955 was the year that Bill Haley recorded Rock Around the Clock, cruising became a part of life, and James Dean starred in Rebel Without a Cause. That being said, Rock Around the Clock was originally released in 1954, but didn't become a hit until 1955 when it was used in the movie Blackboard Jungle.
You are now listening to Rock Around the Clock. This is the theme music from MGM's sensational new picture, Blackboard Jungle.
He also mentions Rebel Without a Cause. It was indeed produced and released in 1955, but its star, James Dean, had been dead for a month by the time it came out. So 1955 did not go great for James Dean. It's impossible to say when exactly cruising, that is, driving your car for pleasure with no specific destination in mind, became popular. Most experts say it happened after World War II. It may well have peaked in 1955. By the 1960s, many saw cruising as a nuisance, blocking the streets and impeding the flow of traffic, leading to anti-cruising laws has in many communities. Historians do look at 1955 as a pivotal year in American history because it's when teenagers truly began to dominate the culture. A decade after World War II, America's young people had more free time and disposable income than ever before, and they began to develop a pop culture of their own, separate from that of their parents.
Recently, I read a book by Ed Sykov, Laughing Hysterically, American Screen Comedy of the 50s. It's really good, highly recommended. There was one section where he discussed the popularity of chimps and monkeys in American culture of the 1950s. Like J. Fred Muggs was the mascot for NBC. Ronald Reagan made Bedtime for Bonzo. Howard Hawks made Monkey Business. And there's even a dead monkey in Sunset Boulevard.
Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business.
What Sykov points out is that monkeys are a lot like children and teenagers. They have a tendency to take over and do what they want. And you kind of have to just appease them and hope that they won't cause too much trouble. And with the monkeys I just listed, a lot of them are kind of made equivalent to human offspring. That's when it hit me that it's kind of an adult perspective on the baby boomer generation. From the 1950s on, almost all of popular culture is going to be about catering to the teenage demographic. They are the ones that you are aiming for, and that's how it has become more and more. If you want to make your movie reach as broad a demographic as possible, you make it PG-13. Everything is for teenagers now, and it's kind of terrible for everyone, including teenagers.
Fonzie says showing you this car is like putting pigs before swine. This is another reference to the gospel according to St. Matthew. In chapter 7, verse 6, Jesus says, "Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine." Tommy and Chachi are thwarted twice in their efforts to see the 1941 film Citizen Kane, the directorial debut of Orson Welles, who also played the lead role and co-wrote the screenplay. I'm sure we're all familiar with the plot of that film, in which a reporter attempts to figure out the meaning of a wealthy man's dying word, rosebud.
Rosebud. Yes, rosebud frozen peas, full of country goodness and green penis.
Fonzie spoils the ending by yelling, "Rosebud's the name of a sled." Wells based the character of Kane on real-life newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst. Rosebud was Hearst's nickname for an intimate part of actress Marion Davies' anatomy. He was infuriated when Wells put this in-joke into the movie. Due to Hearst's interference, Citizen Kane had major distribution problems in 1941 and did not really find an audience until subsequent re-releases. After I was done watching this episode a couple of times for this podcast, I realized that they didn't just choose Citizen Kane randomly as an old movie for Chachi to go see. I think they chose it because it's about a character who becomes haunted by the past and surrounds himself with old junk in his lonely house.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well played, Happy Days.
That's exactly what Fonz is doing, fixating on all this old stuff in a way that's not going to help him. The radio station WKS and its DJ Duke Farouk are fictional.
Are you listening to the Big Bob Little Show?
No, that's Duke Farouk. Big Bob Little, quit like 8 years ago and started to run for Congress.
Big Bob Little, the DJ turned congressman, is also made up for this episode.
I love that they thought we need a fictional DJ and a reason for him to have left. He ran for Congress.
Fonzie says the Bel Air is going to be cherry.
Yeah, when I get this restored, it's going to be cherry.
That means it will be in the same condition it was when it was brand new. Peter, have you heard that expression before? Cherry.
I must have, but I can't remember where.
I know exactly where I heard it. The Weird Al song, White and Nerdy. All my action figures are cherry. Stephen Hawking's in my library.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
And in the song Surf City.
Surf City, here we come. You know it's not very cherry, it's an oldie but a goodie.
Howard says that the sun never sets at this time of year in Sweden.
But listen, this time of year, the sun never sets, huh? Now, what do you think? Isn't that wonderful?
He may be correct. In some parts of the world, north of the Arctic Circle or south of the Antarctic Circle, the sun does not disappear below the horizon during the summer months. This part of the world includes Sweden. How do you think you would handle that, the sun not going down below the horizon for months?
Not to be melodramatic, but I think I would go insane.
Marion mentions their trip to Yosemite.
It's simpler than our trip to Yosemite.
We've heard about their trip to Yellowstone several times, but this is the first reference to Yosemite. It's a national park in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. But since this part of the episode is part of Fonzie's dream, is it canonical that they went to Yosemite?
It's entirely possible that it is, and it was a disaster, and Fonzie heard about this and knows, and that's why he put it in his dream. It would be in keeping with what we know about Howard and his cheapskate ways. ways.
Choo Choo Village is also fictional, but it's amazing that they're open past 1 o'clock in the morning.
I took her on my motorcycle. We went to Choo Choo Village, and I bought a little engineer's cap.
Oh, so you really like this girl?
Up until then, the implication is kind of that he and Nancy, did Inspiration Point type things, but no, they just went to Choo Choo Village, and he got her an engineer's cap.
Marion says there were 3 Charlie Chans, and even lists them.
Yes, sure. Because there were 3 Charlie Chans. There was Sidney Toler, and there was Warner Oland, and J. Carroll Nash.
Sidney Toler, Warner Oland, and J. Carroll Nash. Charlie Chan is a fictional Honolulu police detective who debuted in a series of crime novels by Earl Durr Biggers, starting in 1925. He started appearing in movies as early as 1926, but was not portrayed by Swedish actor Warner Oland until 1931. Oland played Chan in 16 films total. When he died, the role was taken by actor Sidney Toler, who played him 22 times. When Toler died, the role was taken by Roland Winters for 6 more films. J. Carroll Nash played Chan in the TV version, The New Adventures of Charlie Chan, which ran from 1957 to 1958. Other actors have played Chan over the years, but the character has been dormant since 1981, when he was played by Peter Ustinov. Peter, have you taken in any Charlie Chan content in your life?
Yes, because there was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon adaptation in the 1970s called The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan.
The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan.
It's kind of a Scooby-Doo, Josie and the Pussycats knockoff, where Charlie Chan's 10 kids solve mysteries, and some of them are in a band.
One of the nice things about the animated version of Charlie Chan is it's one of the few times when Charlie Chan was actually played by an Asian actor. One of the problems with the Charlie Chan franchise is that he's so often played by non-Asian actors like J. Carroll Nash or Peter Ustinov.
Every so often, when you're consuming pop culture from a bygone era, you get reminded blackface/yellowface/brownface was common for way longer than I assumed. I've been watching a bunch of movies from the 1930s lately for a new podcast that a friend and I are doing about every movie nominated for a Best Original Song Oscar. Blackface keeps showing up, and it's sad and uncomfortable, and I hate it. And here's you telling me that into the 1980s, they were getting Peter Ustinov to put on yellowface and speak fake Chinese proverbs.
We see a close-up of Fonzie's hubcaps as he and Nancy are driving around. They're nice, but they're not from a 1955 Bel Air. Those look like Cadillac hubcaps to me. The white wall tires are wrong, too. In the 1950s, the white stripes were much wider.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
The train that bears down on Fonzie is an Amtrak F40PH from the 1980s. This particular engine, number 213, ran on the East Coast in the 80s and 90s. It was spotted in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Maryland. Engines of this type were used from 1975 to 1992. Other observations, we see an establishing shot of Fonzie's auto repairing that's obviously recycled from the days when this place was called Bronco's Auto Repairing.
Bronco, tearing across the Texas plain.
They've crudely changed the name with a cheap optical effect rather than refilm the whole thing with a new sign. I wonder if future generations will understand Fonzie's joke. Thank goodness it's not Sunday, when he's hit with a newspaper.
In the still.
Thank goodness it's not Sunday.
Do people still know that the Sunday paper was always the thickest, heaviest edition of the week, laden with ads and supplemental sections?
I do, but I feel like I am just old enough to remember reading Sunday funnies, most of which went over my head because I was a child and comic strips are primarily made by the most out-of-touch people ever, and also Nepo babies.
We get a reference to the Cunningham's neighbors, the Burkharts.
We've got the Burkhart's mail again. This time I'm not going to help you to steam it open, Howard.
No.
You might remember grouchy old Mr. Burkhart from Here Comes the Bride Again in season 7.
I guess if Howard steals his mail and steams it open, he has reason to be grouchy.
And Howard's chair is back this week. Not only that, it plays a rather prominent role in this episode when Fonzie nervously backs away from the Cunninghams.
In foreshadowing the end of the episode, he wonders if any of this is taking place outside of his mind.
Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in The Spirit is Willing?
I love Nancy's engineer cap. It's very fun. I like her outfit in general. It's this gray 2 two-piece ensemble. She's got a little jacket and a skirt, and it does feel very 1950s. And I also like that she has the bouncy 1950s hair.
Her hair is amazing in this episode. My only note would have been to give her a little bit more color, but maybe they made her outfits drab because she's a ghost and from the past.
That's what I thought. I think it was foreshadowing of that. If she was an old photograph, she'd have the same color scheme.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
This is maybe Happy Days' most self-aware episode, in that it's an episode about how nostalgia kills. To live in the past forever is a form of death. Fixation on the 1950s especially is a dead end. It's kind of amazing that they did an episode all about that in a show where that's the basic point, or at least it wasn't the beginning before it didn't really know what it was for a while. I wonder how they came up with that and why they thought they would get away with it, and they were right. And it's also a genuinely very effectively scary episode. The part where Fonzie is about to get murdered by a train is genuinely thrilling, and all the back and forth between Howard and Marion about their trip to Sweden is very funny, very effective comic relief.
I can't remember what my reaction to this thing was when I saw it originally. I would have just thought it's a strange, weird, creepy episode of Happy Days that's different from all the other episodes. But now, as an older person, this episode has new meaning for me because I know the folly of trying to recapture your past and trying to regain a younger version of yourself. Still today, people are going on eBay and buying up things from their past, and what they're trying to recover is an earlier version of themselves. And I think what you eventually realize is that you can't do it. That version of yourself is gone, and you can't get him back ever again. You remember the past as only being the good times and everything being perfect. And if you really went back to the past, you wouldn't like it. You wouldn't want to go back. You think you would want to go back, but you really don't.
Yes.
So
do not go back to the 1950s. Settle for watching a 1970s/1980s show about the 50s. The 1950s filtered through an absolutely unreal half-hour sitcom that eventually lost its own plot.
But it is remarkable that this nostalgia-driven show would eventually do an anti-nostalgia episode. So I think Happy Days was very brave to do The Spirit is Willing. And for that reason, it's one of my favorite episodes of the season. And it may be one of my favorite episodes of the entire series. So
same here.
And trust me, you can't recapture your past. You can buy stuff from the past. You can buy old records or old clothes or old cars. And the past is not coming back. And the younger version of yourself is not coming back. So live in the present while you still can.
Live in the present, but cultivate an appreciation for vintage aesthetics. But also learn from the past, because there are so many mistakes in it.
Good point, Peter. So how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things we are doing?
Listeners can follow me on Blue Sky at petervillafranc.bsky.social.
They can follow me on Blue Sky at joeblevins.bsky.social. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, 8 seasons ago, the golden age of Happy Days began when Fonzie moved in. And now, as the show begins to come to an end, Fonzie must move out. In the episode, Fonzie moves out.
I think you just spoiled the plot, but we'll review it anyway. So see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
There is a man. There is a man. A certain man. A certain man. And for the poor, you may be sure that he'll do all he can. Who is this one? Who is this one? His favorite son. His favorite son. Just by his action has attraction magnets on the run. Who loves to smoke? Who loves to smoke? Enjoys a joke. And wouldn't get a bit upset if he were really broke. With wealth and fame. Wealth and fame. He's still the same. Still the same. I'll bet you find you're not alive if you don't know his name.
Full of country goodness and green penis.